how do we grow the NFL internationally? We're the number one sport in the US by, miles.
Yeah.
How do you replicate that internationally? How do we become a true global sport? And you look at the Premier League or the NBA or Formula One, who can really lay claim to being global sports.
Yeah.
I think it probably, for the ownership of the NFL, it rankles a little bit that they're not there.
I'm Ndamukong Suh, and welcome to No Free Lunch, where we talk to experts and athletes about how the most successful people in sports manage their money and grow their wealth.
Danny, what's going on, man? Back in the UK.
Yeah, man. International Suh. Is that your nickname? International Suh?
Hey, man.
That's got to be one that I
keep that on the low. Keep that on the low. International Suh.
But this is a very international talk. We're talking to Henry Hodgson, the GM of the NFL UK.
Yep.
Indirectly or directly your boss?
Yes, he is. He is indirectly, but directly my boss. He gives out all the UK rights and the Ireland rights for TV in Sky Sports, who I work with and for in a lot of ways during the NFL season. He's a part of all those decisions.
Got you. Well, yeah, I'm excited for the conversation, and I think it's a really good graduation from our combo with OC right before the break that we had around NFL Africa. So I'm kind of excited to see how all the things connect, internationally from the UK to Africa to the talent and development programs that he's also over as well.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of exciting and maybe a little breaking news if you're listening closely of. I'll try and get him to tee up some of the new international games that are coming out. But make sure you stick to it right here on No Free Lunch. Henry, thank you for joining the show. I like to call you my indirect boss of the NFL, obviously NFL UK. Really appreciate you joining me. It's awesome to be able to have a conversation with you, but really just would love to understand your history of one, being in the UK as a young lad, as they call it, and then what are your first memories of the NFL?
It's a great question. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm a fan of the podcast. I'm a fan of what you've done with your football career, but after your football career as well. So it's a thrill for me to be on here, and we love having you here in the UK and everything you do for Sky Sports here. It's a good question. So my first memory of football, and you probably heard this from some of the other NFL fans you've met along the way in the UK, but back in kind of the early 80s, mid 80s, when I was a young lad, as you said, football first came on the TV in the UK. At the time, there were 3 free-to-air TV channels. This was the 4th one. Channel 4 launched. And I think probably unwittingly, they got the rights to show the NFL. They showed the best game from the previous week, cut down into a 45-minute sort of highlight package. And it was on a Sunday evening, I don't know, 6, 7 p.m. And it was interesting because at the time, the other channels were showing, one was showing some religious programming, one was showing the Antiques Roadshow, like this program about trading antiques. And then one, and you really can't believe this if you're from the US, was showing dogs herding sheep.
Wow.
So suddenly this sport came, which, had these incredible athletes, looked like they were, what are they wearing? What's going on? And at a time where there wasn't like the diversity of different ways that you could get your entertainment, it really was about like the TV and those 3, now 4 to free-to-air channels, the NFL had this explosive growth and really something that hasn't been replicated since, quite honestly, where a huge proportion of the country was like, well, compared to those other things that I could be watching on TV on a Sunday evening, this thing looks pretty interesting. And so me as a kid, my dad had worked in the US when he was younger. So he knew about the sport and had liked it when he was there. And so I used to just sit and watch it with him. And I fell head over heels in love with this sport. And that really kind of led me on a career path. Obviously, I didn't know that when I was 7 or 8 years old. It led me on a career path where now I am the general manager of the NFL's office here in London.
And would you say that exposure of that free-to-air Channel 4 that got you hooked into the sport was really what kind of molded you and got you interested into the NFL to lead you to where you're at now?
Absolutely. I mean, I watched the sport. I watched, and as I said, they distilled the best game from the previous week down into a kind of bite-sized package. So I really kind of was like, this sport's amazing. Every game's super close. These star athletes are exciting to watch. It looks so different. And at the time, sport in the UK was not going through a great moment. Soccer was sort of at the, I suppose, there's some legacy of the sort of hooliganism piece, and it was really at the worst point there. So I think people were looking for an alternative. And certainly for me, it felt so foreign, so different, so new. It was something that I wanted to embrace. And so, I really kind of, I suppose at some point, especially back in those days when you didn't have the internet, you couldn't kind of follow up on that. I did as much reading and consumption of other material as I could around it to learn more about the sport, to try and put it in context for me.
So with that exposure, what was, in your opinion, the first opportunity that you got into to be involved into NFL? And then was there a specific reason behind that decision, or was it just something that you just wanted to be exposed to working in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, look, you'll laugh at me for this one, but at one point as a kid here, I was like, well, maybe I could play in that league. Pretty quickly, I realized that was not going to be the case, and there weren't really the outlets to do it. Although there was, I think, kind of the tail of the exposure of the sport on TV was that teams did start popping up in this country. But for me, when I was in school, aged, I think, sort of 15, 16 years old, we were encouraged to do some work experience. And a lot of people who were my peers decided that they would, go work where their dad worked or something. And I, on a whim, wrote a letter to the NFL, aged 15 or 16 years old, and said, can I come and work for you? Can I come and get some work experience? During that time, I guess, again, another byproduct of the exposure on TV here, they started playing preseason games internationally. There was this American Bowl series. They played in London and then all over the world. And that summer, they were playing a game in Berlin, Germany, as well as having the European Youth Tackle Football Championships. So this letter that I wrote came back with a, sure you can. In fact, we need some help. Come and be part of this. So summer of, again, I'm going to get the year wrong, 93 or 94. I went to Berlin, Germany. The New York Giants played the San Diego Chargers in a game there. And as I say, there was the European Youth Championships. Lawrence Taylor had just retired, but he was kind of the face that came out there to promote the game. And for a brief period, I was on LT duty. I was told that I was taking LT from place to place for his PR piece.
What was that experience like?
LT was not like putting a 15, 16-year-old kid with LT was probably not the way that that should have been handled. So I got some help, let's say, quite soon after that. But it was that for me really took me from kind of feels like something I'd like to do to, oh my God, this is incredible. How do I make sure that I can continue doing this? So having made some connections when I finished school, kind of common in the UK for some people to take a year between high school finishing and going off to college. So I, again, wrote to some of the same people that I'd worked with and asked them if I could come back and work for them there. And at that time, NFL Europe had come back. The London Monarchs was the team in London. So I then spent basically a season with that team as part of, again, kind of an internship program. But really my goal was I want to go in there and I want to make myself so indispensable that they will think we can't possibly continue without this guy. And so as an 18, 19-year-old kid, I just put my hand up for anything and everything and got my foot in the door.
And that's really honestly, I think something that people don't understand is like, if you don't ask, you can't receive. And you put yourself out there out on a limb, you got uncomfortable. And that allowed you to get into the NFL offices. And being 12 years in Los Angeles, what were some of those challenges and changes that you saw that you had to go through as an individual, but let alone as a league had to overcome during that time?
Yeah, so my career had started here in the UK, and I was part, as I say, of NFL Europe, and then part of the team that worked on the first games that took place in London, the first international games. Then I got an opportunity to go and work in the US, and I got kind of exactly the flip side of the coin here, especially at that time preceding the London games. people, you said I work for the NFL. They're like, I have no idea what that is. What's that stand for? I think I often was like, is that the Farmers Union?
Yeah.
Like, nope, not that. Here we are now, suddenly working in the US, and it's the number one sport. No, you don't have to explain to anyone what the NFL is. What I got a taste of there, and I think what I was able to bring in return was, from a promotional standpoint, having been able to learn how you promote a sport that people don't know about and don't like yet, going to the US and being able to take some of that and reach new audiences and explain it maybe through a different perspective was what I could bring there. So I think my time in the US was obviously incredibly valuable, because then I was able to broaden the network of people that I knew within the NFL and beyond, and kind of create the opportunity that I was then able to come back to the UK after 12 years working for the NFL in Los Angeles and take all the learnings I'd had previously from being in London, and then from understanding how the sport is marketed and grown in the US to bring that back here.
Yeah, and with that, you come back in 22 as the NFL UK and Ireland GM. And I say you're my indirect boss because you were graciously enough to help me with the Sky Sports opportunity that I work with now for 3 years ago now, when I first came here with my family, but then obviously most recently a great 3-year deal with that organization. How did that opportunity come about for you being the NFL UK GM in Ireland as well?
Well, so, I mean, I got the most incredible sort of foundation and mentor in a guy called Alistair Kirkwood, who was previously the general manager here. He was the one who I worked with from 2003 when I sort of permanently joined the NFL in this market. Alistair was the guy who came up with the sort of the concept and really had the brave initiative to go to the NFL and say we should be playing regular season games in the UK and beyond. So I was very lucky to have a great mentor and someone who kind of showed the path. Alistair's career in the same role that I'm in now ended around sort of 2020, around the COVID period. And so I was in LA at the time. My kids were sort of heading to teenage years and kind of had a moment where, so personally, was thinking, and it wasn't a bad thing. I loved living in LA, but it was sort of a now or never to come back.
Yeah.
I would have felt very guilty about moving my teenage children and taking them away from the friend group, et cetera, that they'd built. Yeah. But I felt like if you do that at sort of 12, that's probably more acceptable than it would have been at 15 or 16.
Very much
I don't know.
So.
I don't know if that's necessary, if they told the same thing, but so it felt like the right time. Yeah. And I guess coincided with this opportunity here in the UK. Again, I have a great network at the NFL, and I've had a lot of great mentors and great leaders during my time there, and they offered me the opportunity to step into this role, and it was one that I felt like I had to take.
And I think your kids will, as they continue to grow and get older and become closer to my age, they'll realize soon that those elementary, middle school, and high school relationships really didn't matter, as you know.
You know what's interesting? I do agree with you, but I think what's cool, and I'm always trying to find ways to get them off of devices and things, but actually, the world's so connected now. And so some of the relationships that they built, and the same goes for me, the great relationships I have with people in LA, so much more easy now to keep up for them than it would have been 20 years ago if they'd been there. You kind of then ripped out of somewhere. FaceTime didn't exist, and all the other apps that they like to be on, but it really just keeps them in contact with people.
From the business of the NFL, initially, where did it lead them to start to invest into overseas in the international game? And I more so asked a question from a standpoint of, like, there was test case, there was NFL Europe, there was all these different particular pieces. Where we're at now, it's like the NFL wants to take over the entire world. So like that investment in that time, like where did that shift? Because it seems like there was toe in, toe out, but like when did it really say, hey, now we're full throttle into the international scene?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've been lucky enough over a 20+ year career with the NFL, mostly focused on international, to have seen all the different iterations of that. Like I say, from me being a kid and it first getting exposure here to preseason games being played. So I think the NFL always had an eye on international. Yeah. But I would say, probably to answer your question, is really only in the last maybe 5 years that the momentum and the true focus of, and you know this better than anyone, the 32 owners who, when they make a decision, all of a sudden that goes from being, well, maybe we'd be interested in this, to this is a huge priority.
Yeah.
So I think the last 5 years is where that's happened. I think in the stretch leading up to that, what we've seen is, and this is a nice part of working in the international business for the NFL, the sort of entrepreneurial spirit of being able to try things internationally. And NFL Europe at the time was the international focus. For whatever reason, and there were a number of them, it didn't work. It wasn't the end of the world when they pulled the plug on that. And they moved on to the next thing. It was international games. Okay, what do we learn from that? And how do we keep learning from those things? I think where we've got to now is a really focused initiative and momentum from the whole of the NFL. And that's, ownership down, all of the different departments within the league office, all of the clubs getting behind the idea of how do we grow the NFL internationally. We're the number one sport in the US by, miles.
Yeah.
How do you replicate that internationally? How do we become a true global sport? And you look at the Premier League or the NBA or Formula One, who can really lay claim to being global sports.
Yeah.
I think it probably for the ownership of the NFL, it rankles a little bit that they're not there. And so I think the commission has done a fantastic job of focusing the league to say, we can do this. We've got to be methodical about it. We've got to have the right approach and prioritize things in the right way, but we can get there.
But would you also say there's timing is very key as well? And when I speak of timing, because we talked about earlier with our kids, in your kids primarily being able to stay connected to living in the UK, but also being able to still have friends in the US and all over the world, that connectivity of how easy it is to kind of be connected to everybody at any particular point in time. And it's really only the matter of time zones when people are up or not up. Does that say the timing now to go internationally is that much more easier versus previously it was not, especially even with technology?
Yeah, we live in a much more connected world, as you say. So I think it's easier for people around the world to engage with the sport. I think the other timing piece that's interesting and certainly been a consideration as the NFL's looked at what markets to go in is literally the time zones and kind of where it is or isn't convenient to watch the sport. As you know, having spent some late nights in a studio in the UK, the primetime games, in theory, the best games of each week are pretty hard for people here to watch. It's 1:30 a.m. kickoff. And then you think about that, how that changes around the world. You go to Asia, some of those, even the early kickoff games are late at night there. So all of those are considerations. I think the technology piece of it and that connectivity, and this is true in the US, I suppose, to some extent. I'm a believer that you can be a fan of the NFL or frankly anything without necessarily consuming it live, without necessarily having to sit down and watch 3 hours of a football game. You can watch the highlights on YouTube or on whatever social platform you prefer. You can listen to podcasts. You can speak to friends about it. You could be the same level of fandom, if that's a measurable thing, as someone who sat down and watched a whole game. You just consume things differently. And I think that, again, the proliferation of different ways you can engage with and consume content, whatever it might be, has changed probably, 15 years ago. If you'd said, define a fan for me, it would be, well, did they watch the game or not? I think you can be a fan of the NFL and not necessarily watch every single game all the way through.
That's very true, because you look at even podcasts and even like in the live sports, you see Twitter, Instagram, these quick hits that fill you into exactly what happened, or you read it on Twitter or whatever it may be. Those are the different particular pieces that I think has advanced the game and made it that much more interesting. I want to transition a little bit. As the NFL is growing internationally, you have to have the buy-in, as you mentioned, by the owners in the particular teams. And we saw, at least during my majority of my career, it was the Jaguars, it was the Miami Dolphins, these groups kind of from the South Florida that were focused on coming international. And yes, it had ties because of, I call it football, soccer, to everybody in the US from that standpoint. But they had that connectivity. Khan obviously has ownership of EPL teams. There's a lot of connectivity with Stephen Ross with his stuff that he did with ICC. How do teams identify where they want to have their support internationally and what's their particular region, and what's that process like? And do they have a choice, or are they also told by the league office as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's probably two different elements to it. a few years ago, we launched something called the Global Markets Program, which really allowed clubs to decide which markets they wanted to invest in. And I guess the insight that was born out of was it's much more likely that you'll become a big fan of the sport if you have a favorite team or a favorite player. You're not going to fall in love with the NFL brand. You're going to fall in love with the Miami Dolphins or the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that was really the starting point, is then giving the clubs the license to focus markets, choose markets, and then decide, what they want to do in the markets. And honestly, 32 different teams had 32 different approaches to that. The Dolphins, as an example, they looked at the population of Miami, which is obviously a lot of different Hispanic cultures, and said, right, we want to go and become everyone's favorite team back home, so their family in Miami can say we're Dolphins fans, and their family in Colombia or Mexico or Spain can say the same things. There are some teams that took the approach of, we have a player from a market, so we're going to focus there because we already have some exposure there. There were teams who looked at the existing fandom in the market. So in the UK, for example, the Chicago Bears historically have had a big fan base here. They said, well, why wouldn't we go somewhere where we're already popular without having been in the market and push harder in that market? So I think a number of different reasons, but to answer your question directly, they had the opportunity, they had the choice to which markets they wanted to go into. Separate to that, then there's the who plays in games in those markets, as and when there are games in those markets. That's a little bit hard. I mean, we're obviously intending to and trying our best to land the right teams who have chosen that market as part of the Global Markets Program to then play in those markets. And that's certainly the sort of long-term intention. But with the limited inventory we have, it doesn't always match up that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned players and teams being able to choose. Like, I remember we all talked about Linsanity back in the day from the NBA side of things. It's like, how do you look to position a team that's going to the first game in Ireland, like we saw this last year, and potentially you have all these other organizations, whether it's Italy or Australia that's going to come up in this year, and like, how did they make certain decisions? Like, Philly makes sense to me because obviously they have a native Australian that's on that team. So how do you guys look at those different nuances and those different pieces, but also saying, hey, on the countryside, we want to have the best teams come to us as well. So it's like, it's kind of that fine balance, as you mentioned.
It is a fine balance. It's certainly evolved a lot since, we had one game in the UK, and then it was like, okay, well, we're just solving for one issue. Now I get a sense of what the NFL schedulers must look like when they're trying to do the whatever it is, 270 odd games and try and put all those pieces together. Now that we have more and more games internationally, you're trying to fit the right pieces in the right places. I think first of all, we're led by the league office and with ownership of the club. So, you mentioned Dublin there, which was a fantastic new initiative, a new market that we went into this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers have Irish heritage ownership. They were very passionate about growing that brand, their team in Ireland. And so it was a kind of a no-brainer that if we were going to go and play in Dublin, it needed to be with the Steelers in the lead. You mentioned Australia again. Jordan Mailata's presence on the Eagles has had a big effect in why they would go into that market. But I think in the end, it really is it does come down to then the other pieces of the scheduling puzzle, which get relatively complex. You're looking at the international games, the home team, what we call the designated team, always comes from the conference that has 9 home games in a year. So that alternates on an annual basis. So 2025, that was the AFC. Next year, that'll be the NFC. So you've got the consideration there. Part of the agreement that the clubs have to play internationally is that it will kind of rotate mostly. So you'll only have to do it once in every so many years, depending on how many games there are. So there's all these other nuances that kind of either makes the list very short in a given year or suddenly opens it up in another year. And again, then you're trying to line it up with this team is focused on growing its fan base in this market, or this is a new market and we want to put a great game there, or those kind of things. So we're always juggling those pieces.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've talked a lot about the league side of things and the players and the coaches and organizations. But I'm really curious also, like, I was fortunate enough, and I thought this was one of the greatest games to be a part of, was in Madrid. Being able to call that game live this year. But what attributes to having a great host city? What does the league look at and say, wow, this city can be something very special, because I felt you guys did an amazing job with Madrid, and I haven't been to some of the other cities. I've played in them, but I haven't been in them from a spectator and analytic side of things, to say this was a great city and this was an excellent choice. Yeah,
it's a really good question. I think it probably, the consideration there is about the city, but I think more than that, it's about, is this a market? Is this a country that we can grow a fan base in? I think the NFL's been very deliberate about making sure that we're not just going to a place. We don't want to ever be a traveling circus that shows up and goes away. We want to be able to build a 365-day-a-year business in that market. And so we're aligned that you go into markets with the game potentially as the catalyst for growth in the market, but it can't be the only thing. It's, you know, we can talk about, we think we've identified sort of 7 tactics that can help you grow the sport in there. And the games are just one of those. It's not the biggest piece. They all need to be sort of done equally. So really you start from which markets are we going to prioritize? I think during a process that we ran a couple of years ago, we identified 13 global countries that we think are the markets that the NFL has the best opportunity to become a top 3 sport in. And then I suppose a layer down when it comes to games, is there a stadium that can support the NFL? And that's not necessarily a given, right? We're looking for a specific field size. That's a starting point, you know, and that rules out some stadiums. You're looking for, can it fit, instead of 11 or whatever it is, 15 soccer players into a locker room? Can you fit an NFL team into an NFL team-sized locker room?
Of 53, but it's really like close to 100.
Yeah, exactly.
With employees and
much
everything.
Larger men generally than soccer teams. So though, again, that rules some things out. So that kind of shrinks the options for you quite quickly, honestly. We have a team, a fantastic operations team around the games that goes out and is, you know, right now scouting other cities and other stadiums and making sure that operationally we can do things. And then outside of the stadium itself, it's hotels. Are there enough hotels? Are there practice sites for the team so that when they come here, you know, one of the things that I remember the first game in London in 2007, the commissioner being very clear on is, the clubs need to have a seamless experience. They need to come here, and you've experienced this as a player. It's taking you out of your routine, and routine I know is incredibly important to NFL players and to coaches and to the clubs themselves. So it's going to take you out of that routine, but how close to the routine can it be? Because if it doesn't work in the first one, frankly, you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. If it hadn't worked, we would never have done another one. Clearly, we've evolved, and are they all perfect? Probably not, but we're finding ways and ways to get better and better at that process.
And you mentioned 7 attributes of what goes into wanting to leave a lasting impression in a living and breathing organism within a city. What are those, if you can share all of them? And then also, do you see flag football a big part of that, especially now in this day and age? Yeah,
that's absolutely one of them. So I think the 7, sort of as we look to, you know, the UK or any other market that we want to grow the NFL in, there's the games piece, obviously a big one. There's the media reach, and you've obviously been a huge part of that in the UK over the last few years. But how do you make sure that you're servicing the existing fans, you know, through the likes of Sky Sports, teaching new people, and we think that free-to-air partnerships, we just this year partnered with Channel 5.
I fight you on that one a little bit.
In the UK, but at least being able to reach people through that medium. And then our direct-to-consumer product, we have this NFL Game Pass product, which allows fans wherever they are in the world to watch their favorite team.
Which
That's
is huge.
for the most avid fans. I know you've experienced that as well. So media reach is a really important one. The clubs piece, the global markets program, you know, how do you create fandom for a specific team? Localization and relevance. How do you become culturally relevant in the environment that you're in? How do you infuse the NFL into the Premier League? And we have a great partnership with the Premier League, for example. So how do you find ways to make sure that you're showing up in the market in an authentic way that actually fits into that market? Linked to that being year round, obviously the NFL in the US, while it has a relatively short playing season, you know, when the draft's on, that's the most important story in sports, regardless of the fact that a game isn't being played. So how do we create those moments year round in the UK so that we're not just showing up when the games are on in London or at the Super Bowl, but 365 days a year as best as possible. And then to your point, participation is unbelievably important. We've put a huge focus, and the Olympics inclusion of flag football has put a huge focus on flag. So how do we do more with flag football? How do we build participation? Right now in the UK, we have 250,000 kids playing flag football in schools. 4 years ago, that was 30,000 kids. So we're continuing to see incredible growth there. And that's become a really, really big focus for us in this market. And then the final one is about creating local heroes. And I suppose that's a little bit about the elite pathway.
Yeah.
How do you have more players from this market that can actually be in the US? And, back to my point earlier about those truly global sports, you think of the Premier League. I know you're an Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
Arsenal's club has, players from who knows how many different markets.
Yeah.
We want to get to that point. Probably we won't get to that point, but we want to get to the point where there are recognizable British faces playing in the NFL. Yeah. And in order to do that, we need to create that elite pathway. So we launched NFL Academy in the UK, and that was, again, something that OC Manura and others worked on. And the goal was, how do you give kids that high school, really high-end high school experience of playing football, but also getting a great education that will give them a chance to get recruited by a US college to go and have that football education, but also the great US academic education as well, and potentially put some of those players into the NFL. And a slow burn. We launched that here in 2019, so it's going to take some time for players to come through that pathway. But we believe we put together a really great program that's developing some really strong athletes who are having the chance to play against top level high school programs who come here or we travel there. And the type of recruitment that we're getting mirrors kind of some of the top high schools in the US in terms of players going to play in college football. So those are the 7 tactics we think will help us grow the sport.
No, that's great. We're going to come back to my big brother, OC. But before we move on to the player pathways and understanding kind of everything that you guys have built in and around that, because I feel like it's amazing and there's been some great successes from it. The new international games, what can the fans expect? You may not be able to share all the new cities coming out this year, but obviously we spoke of one in Australia. But I'll give you also even a test case. Like, let's say I wanted to pick Italy. How would you identify Italy as that's the next best city, or that's an opportunity to be a next best city? And then what are some of the cities that are on the timeline or time horizon for next year or the year after to come online for a game?
Yeah, great question. So I think back to sort of we prioritized markets, and there was a bit of work that was done, and really it started with, this isn't a surprise for people who follow the NFL. What do the revenue opportunities look like in that market, and kind of what's the existing fan base look like? So one of the leading pieces there is how much money is spent on sports media rights in that market. The US obviously leads the globe. The UK is actually second behind that. Okay. So what are the other leading markets outside of the US and the markets we're already in that we should be looking at and saying, this much money is spent on an annual basis on sports rights. Yeah. If we become a top sport in that market, if we grow the NFL fan base in that market, what percentage of that could we potentially take as well? And so that led us, as I said, to 13 markets. A lot of them we're already active in. The UK, clearly Mexico and Canada are markets that we've been really focused in. The other markets that you and I have talked about or seen that games are in: Spain, Germany, Australia. China's a market that we have a office in and have a business in. But then there are a handful of other markets. You mentioned Italy. That's certainly one of them. France is one in Europe that we've looked at. Japan in Asia is a really interesting market for us.
You think there'll be games sometime soon?
Well, that's my point. So, we've identified that those are the ones that have an opportunity for the NFL to grow in. Yeah. It's then back to the previous point. You need to identify the stadiums, all the other operational elements that go into playing games. So without being specific about which markets I think we'll be in, because there are pieces of that are still kind of being investigated. We've heard very clearly from the commissioner we want to continue expanding, and that at some point he sees a world where we could be playing up to 16 international games a year. So really the question is kind of, what's the footprint of that look like? Is that 16 different markets? Is it multiple games like we have in the UK in some of the markets that have been chosen? But ultimately, all of that is with the goal of being one of those 7 pillars to help grow the sport.
Part of that international growth, I feel like OC Humanura was a big leader in that space. And especially from, I remember in the midst of playing how many years ago, NFL Africa just kind of popped up on the scene. And OC actually reached out to me and said, hey, I would like you to support this and whatnot. I was like, happy to do it, but like, tell me what we're talking about. And so seeing the international pathways and the NFL Academy and NFL Africa, where do you see not only the success stories, but the growth from inception of all of that to date?
Yeah, again, the participation piece and the development of those local heroes are 2 really important pillars for us that create a lot of opportunity. OC is, as you know, an incredibly unique guy who finished his very, very successful playing career and made the decision when, I would imagine that OC, knowing him well, if he put his mind to almost anything, he would have had success doing it. But he decided that finishing his career, having grown up for a period of his youth in the UK, in London, he wanted to come back here and see what it was that he could do here. And OC is incredibly creative and thoughtful, and spent some time working in our office. And between him and actually another guy who I have an enormous amount of admiration for, Andrea, who's now playing or coaching rather with the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL, they kind of came up with 2 different programs that have become the backbone of that player development, that elite player development program, the International Player Pathway program and the NFL Academy. And both were with the goal of how do you put more faces, more international faces into the NFL. OC said time and time again, and I completely agree with it, it can't be that all the best athletes in the world are in the US. They have to be elsewhere. And he's proven that now time and time over. So I think those programs then led him probably to start thinking about, okay, well, there's a proliferation of players of African origin in the NFL, and therefore there's got to be a lot more of those type of talented athletes who just haven't been exposed to this sport in Africa. So I was lucky enough to work with OC on some of those first NFL Africa initiatives, and the goal was both the kind of player development, talent development areas, but then also how do we make sure that the African diaspora are exposed more to the NFL and get to see all the incredible things that players with that heritage are doing in the NFL as well. So we worked together on that. And then I, as I say, was lucky enough to go on that first NFL Africa trip. And it was very clear immediately that the pool of players that were there were unbelievably talented. Again, just hadn't had the exposure to the sport. So they then kind of, depending on their age group, got fed into the NFL Academy. If they were in that sort of 16 to 18-year-old bracket, or got fed into the International Player Pathway program. And I think there's now, I don't know, maybe 10 guys plus who have come through that NFL Africa program. And that was really only in 2022 that he did that first camp in Africa, that are now actually playing as either part of the practice squad or active roster in the NFL.
Where do you envision the business perspective of NFL investing in this type of program?
Of the player development program specifically? I think, again, that comes down to if you can create local heroes, if you can create people who I can sit as a fan in the UK and say, wow, I'm so proud that Efe Obada is playing in that game because I know where he comes from. I know what it took for him to get there. That's going to bring people closer to the sport. So with that being one of those goals, I think an investment in developing more and more players that fans in the UK or any other market can relate to and say, this is my guy, I'm going to support that team, or I'm going to follow that player as a result of it, is going to help develop that fandom and ultimately, back to the point I made before, help earn a little bit more of that share of the media rights dollars in any given market.
The NFL has continued to cease to amaze and grow in so many different ways. And I think there's a lot of exposure and experience of being able to continue to do that, especially with these programs led by true veterans.
Yep.
And we all understand that we're not all from the U.S. and we've all come to a culmination of where we are at now. But Henry, this has been great. I really appreciate the time, but I'm not going to let you go without my last question, which is, in your journey in life, what is the biggest price you've had to pay for a breakthrough?
Yeah, I love this question. For me, I mean, it's not a real cost, but so as I said, I worked for the NFL from a long time, but permanently from 2003 to 2010 here in London. Mm-hmm. And then kind of on a whim and applied for a job in LA and unexpectedly got a call back from someone who ran it. I didn't know they were the one hiring for it, but got a call back from someone who I'd worked with before. Yeah. And they said, we'd like to offer you that job. At the time, been married for a couple of years. I had an 8-month-old kid and I didn't know anyone in LA. And frankly, I'd been to LA a few times and I didn't feel like it was a city that I loved. Yeah. But I understood and recognized the opportunity that it was going to afford me. Yeah. And so took the leap to go to a place where, as I said, I didn't really know anyone and I didn't know how I'd be received working for the NFL there, and being a Brit was probably, going to be quite unlikely. And it's something I look back on, and it completely changed my life, both professionally but also personally, because it was a great place to live. You just have to sort of get your head around the.
You got to find the right
you
section.
Find the section, and you never have to worry about the rest of it. You know what it's like. So I think that gave me a breakthrough. And frankly, I think for any young person, if you have the opportunity to go live and work overseas, I think it will give you that breakthrough. I think it's a game changer for you, and it sort of gives you a little bit of a lease on life. You think of video games when you get a second life. I always felt like I could take risks and do things that I might not have been comfortable doing at home because I always had the opportunity to come home. Yeah. And so I would say to anyone, and I do often to young people that I work with, if you get that chance, go do it, because you'll never be sorry that you did it.
Man, that's great advice. And it plays into something I say all the time. Learn to be uncomfortable. Yep. And if you're overseas and in a place that you're brand new, that nobody knows you, guess what? It's that much easier to be uncomfortable.
It's that easy to be uncomfortable because you're uncomfortable anyway. Right. So you can push that boundary as far as you want to. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think then it's incumbent on you to explain to people who come after you why, whilst it might feel uncomfortable, they should go do it as well. Yeah,
for sure. Well, thank you, Henry. This has been an amazing conversation. Obviously, joining No Free Lunch was a huge success for us, and being able to have you. And as I said, you're my boss, so I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for everything you do. Honestly, as I said, creating those heroes, those faces that are recognizable to people in the markets is an important thing. And I think you've become that in the UK through the fact that you've taken that risk, that you've come and been on Sky Sports. You're doing a fantastic job, and we love having you here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The information provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified financial and or legal professionals before making any legal or financial decisions or investments.
Wow, what a great conversation. And ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway that I have from that conversation is not being afraid to be uncomfortable and taking a leap of faith. And if you don't aspire to really find a way to push yourself, you can't expect great things. And Henry, as you heard through his story, he's pushed that envelope to put himself in a great position to now lead the NFL in not only the UK, but also Ireland and all over parts of Europe as the GM for the NFL and international games. And the NFL is growing, and I'm excited to be a part of it in multiple ways. But ultimately, it's all about the fans, and it's all about bringing the awareness to the game and how people truthfully can be a part of it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe to No Free Lunch on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.